Okay, let's revisit some of these thoughts. Go in a little bit. I'm going to come back to the rib cage, something like this. Again, I'm going to just kind of truncate or go in, cut away. Remember this is somewhat like an egg. It's a concept. It's an idea. And I am truncating that egg. And again, low in front and high in the back, like a t-shirt cut. Low in front, here's where the sternum is, right around in this area. Okay. And just in the simplest sense, we have the thoracic arch. And again, I said that we have different kinds of arches depending on the type of rib cage it is. We'll just take this one for the moment. At the top, we have the manubrium. And keep that in mind. And that's the top part. And this is the main body of the sternum. And it comes down here like that. And out from here, we have a clavicle. I'm just going to do the clavicle on this side for the moment. Remember, there are different directions for the clavicle. They could be any number of possibilities, but the one I choose as my standard goes up slightly, and it's in a slight S curve, the attitude of it. So if we, basically start in here like this, then we'll come across and go up here. Remember, we're not seeing this broadside either. You remember it goes back around. So this is not broadside, so therefore we're not seeing its true length. And out here is the chromium process off the spine of the scapula. It takes the little turn up this way, all right? And in here, right in that area, we have the coracoid process, which is on basically the top area of the subscapularis portion of the scapula. Okay. So the scapula is back in here someplace. I'll keep that light. The first rib will be in here off the manubrium. We said it goes back like this to this portion where we have T1. T stands for thorax or thoracic 1. And we also talked about the flattened area in front, the area that's more or less flat, and that the ribs kind of, we got 1, 2, I'm going to just draw this rather lightly, 3, and this whole area here is cartilage. We spoke about that, and then it becomes more bone-like as it turns away from this particular front area. In the meantime, this is kind of like spreading out. And fanning out. So the first one is going up. As we began to come down 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we said that there were 6 true, sometimes referred to as 6 true ribs, and the 7th being the beginning of the false ribs. Sometimes the 7th is also considered a true rib because it actually does begin at the sternum. But then 8, 9, and 10 branch off. 8, 9, and 10 branch off from there, right? Off from 7. And then as we hit the edge of the costal cartilage, we were saying that all the ribs go up at that particular point. So that was part of our earlier discussion. This is the xiphoid process here, the manubrium here, the main body of the sternum there, the clavicle coracoid process on the subscapularis portion of the scapula. And so that represents more or less the view that we had been discussing. Now, if we come out here, we have on the scapula the glenoid process, and the head of the humerus coming down this way. Just giving a sense of direction and proportion. So let me hit that, I'll hit this, because these are the major players that we're talking about here. So we'll do this, right? Okay. The neck, I was saying in the simplest way, fits in this way. And I think it's important to keep a sense of this. So I'm often asked, how does the neck attach to the main body? And if you just think of a cylinder that is placed into this cutaway that we made at the top of the egg, see, so there's a manubrium. That's not a bad fit for the front view. And then we were saying that we could pull off in this direction for the muscles of the back of the neck and the shoulder. It's the trapezius muscle. All right. And we could also talk about the deltoid. But before we do, I just want to discuss for a moment the pectoralis muscles, the pec minors. And they are essentially coming off from the ribs here, and they're underneath the pec majors. So they're coming off from the ribs here, 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 like this, over to the coracoid process. Now, you may not think that this is important, but it does have a visual effect, and that's what I will try to demonstrate. So what we've got then is it going to rib 2, 3, and 4. Well, let's try rib 3, 4, and 5. Let's do it that way. Yeah, okay. Let's rib 3, 4, and 5, because here's 1 and 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so they're doing that, and that's underneath the pec major. The pec major has 3 portions to it. There is the clavicular part, which attaches all along the clavicle. So rather than breaking this down into smaller increments than that, I want to give a sense of that direction. This is pulling across to the outside of the stem of the humerus, pulling over here, and low. The main body, the kind of the portion that we think of as the main section of the pecs, comes down. Now look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right around in here are the pec majors, second section. So top section is pulling low. The sternal part of the pecs coming in higher like this. So you've got this, and then you have the might be referred to as the abdominal portion, which is pulling from 5, it's down into 6, 7, and is pulling up this way. So notice there's an overlap over here as they cross over and attach to the outside of the stem of the humerus. All right, now we could put on the deltoid. So the deltoid is attaching approximately 1/3 of the way along the stem of the clavicle or collarbone, and it pulls the anterior portion of it pulls down a little bit like this, and then you have the center portion and then a posterior portion. So the medial portion pulls a little lower. This comes in a little high, a little lower, so it might appear something like that. So you get a kind of a thickness here. Now that might feel a little far away, but remember we've got the arm muscles and we also have the latissimus back here and so on, pulling off. All right. So we have, I'll just draw this in a little darker at that point. Something like that. Okay. So what we've discussed so far is a series of some of the major muscles. Now, the character of some of these, like I said, this cuts in a little higher, a little lower, and you might not see that distinction so clearly on most people. Someone that works that area out, you're going to see it much more prominently, the division in these three parts of the deltoid muscle. Probably the same thing here. The trapezius is coming along, and it might have a slight rise here, or it could be just a straight line, or it could also dip. It comes over, you're going to see this bump perhaps in the flattening as we go into the deltoid. So the character of that might be something like that. Now, we're going to see a slight bulge along this area because the muscle that creates that is right behind the ear on the skull. And that's the sternocleidomastoid. It's pulling around. Its main body is in here in this area. And it's pulling along and attaching here to the manubrium. Okay. And it has a slight flange in here like this. A portion that's flatter that pulls down this way. I'll just draw it that way. In the meantime, we're seeing a muscle that's pulling from the jaw down this way, and it goes over here and goes to the back side, the back portion of the coracoid process. It is the omohyoid, and notice it takes a turn as it goes. It takes a turn as it goes. And the reason I'm describing this muscle is because we see it as one of the muscles in the neck that kind of flutes like that. And it is actually going through, it's pulling down, but it's going through a loop that comes all the way over here from the manubrium. We can't see that from a front portion and in some anatomy books because the sternocleidomastoid is in front of it. So it goes through a loop, pulls over, and goes to the back end of this hook-like portion in here called the coracoid process. We've also described, I'm reminding you, these internal pec muscles, or the pec minors. We've also mentioned that that's attached to the coracoid process. Two other muscles attached there. And I think that's what's interesting, is that this is so instrumental in so many things that we begin to see when the arm starts to move around. Anyway, as we're pulling down here, we see a little bit of the latissimus, and in here, the abdominal muscles are pulling down this way. And just to give you a little character to this, and in between and underneath coming out there are the serratus muscles. They're approximately in here, and they're going back, and the obliques down here into the flank portion of the oblique. This is attaching more or less to the iliac crest that's coming around from behind. So if the rib cage is here, let's drop that iliac crest down a little bit like that. So give a little distance between the rib, as we see it, and the iliac crest. So we're not seeing this portion, we're seeing this edge. Okay, so something like that. All right, now, let's say, take this and this. Let's raise the arm up on this side now. So let's say the clavicle is actually raising up in this direction, right? When it goes, it takes the whole shoulder girdle with it, of course. So the scapula is actually going to pull up and out, pulls up and out. And so it raises the coracoid process as well. Now, for the moment, I'm just going to simply draw a cylinder that indicates the arm, just to start. So we've got the clavicle coming up and over, And what is also supporting that raise in here is the trapezius muscle, like this. Now notice that it might be slightly more involved. So you see that it contracts a little bit and rounds out a little bit. Okay. The pecs across here, as we said, attach to the outside of the humerus. So therefore, if they're in the outside of the humerus and the humerus is up here, it's got to attach up here. The pecs have got to attach up here. So that's a pretty good stretch. And you remember that we will see, as this pulls up, some of the deltoid. See this? We see some of that deltoid pulling up and out. And the deltoid is actually wrapping around behind. We perhaps could see some of it on some sort of an angle. It's possible to see that. This is pulling up. Now, the pecs are pulling up and over, but we actually see, when we look at the pecs, and again, it might be pulling from down into this section, like we said, pulling here. But it also does something like this. It's pulling in this way, see? Why does it do that? Well, this reflects what's happening with pec minor muscles, as we showed over on this side. We're showing that they attach to the coracoid process. That is, this pull is that group of muscles pulling to inside the armpit. They're pulling towards there, but this eventually takes over as the pecs pull up and over, like this, right? So it pulls that way, but then continues on up and over. So there's a sense that it wants to go in, wants to pull in that direction. So it gives a certain kind of character to the pec as it pulls up and over. And that's what happens when you look at it in action. Again, we're seeing this pull this way, heading in this direction. And we have a sense of the flange, but we also have a sense now of the omohyoid bone, which is pulling this way, so we can see its pull here. And it's pulling where? It's pulling over to the coracoid process because it attaches to the back end of it. So notice that the curve is a little stronger turn here as it pulls in that direction out of its loop. All right, so we have this loop underneath here, and this is pulling stronger over this way. So we see, okay, that's involved in this movement. Also, I said that there were other things that attach to the coracoid process. One of them is the bicep. Bicep is one of its origin points is at that point. And it's back slightly. So there's another muscle that attaches underneath, which actually complements the bicep. And that muscle is called the coracobrachialis. Big name for a very little muscle. It's pulling this way. And we'll just take this way at this point. So we have the bicep pulling up and over. We have the rib cage here. Right. And the latissimus is pulling up, and it also tucks in. Right? It tucks in this way and attaches that way. We might see a little bit above it. We might see a little bit of the teres major, which is the muscle, the lowest muscle on the scapula in the back.